If it's Friday, momentum builds in Washington for the potential of a nationwide ban on TikTok, amid new reporting that the Justice Department is investigating the app's Chinese owner for spying on journalists. Plus, has the contagion been contained? A top Treasury official says the banking system appears to be stabilizing after a wild week of bank failures and bank rescues. And new reporting from NBC News on setbacks facing U.S. officials as they seek Mexico's help in combating the dangerous and deadly cartel-fueled drug trafficking at the southern border. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd, reporting in Washington. TikTok, you're on the clock. That's the clear message coming from Washington right now amid growing concerns over Beijing's influence over the popular app. A bipartisan group of senators introduced sweeping legislation last week with TikTok in mind. It would grant U.S. regulators power over tech that is produced by countries with an adversarial relationship with the United States. There's similar momentum for action in the House, not surprising. The White House has endorsed the Senate's legislation, and a source close to the company tells NBC News that the administration went further and demanded that TikTok's Chinese owners divest from the app or face a nationwide ban. It's frankly the same thing Donald Trump attempted to do during his one term as president. NBC has also confirmed that the Department of Justice is now investigating ByteDance's use of TikTok to possibly spy on journalists. The news was first reported by a Forbes journalist who was one of the reporters reportedly surveilled by ByteDance. We're going to speak with her in a moment. The news from the DOJ highlights warnings from top intelligence officials who appeared before Congress last week to sound the alarm over potential national security threats posed by the Chinese government's control over this app.
Could they use TikTok to control data on millions of users?
Yes.
Could they use it to control the software on millions of devices, given the opportunity to do so?
Yes.
Could they use it to drive narratives, like to divide Americans against each other, for example?
Yes, and I would make the point on that last one in particular that we're not sure that we would see many of the outward signs of it happening if it was happening.
General Nakasone, do you share Director Wray's concerns? Are you willing to answer the question whether we should ban it?
Certainly, one third of Americans get their news from TikTok every single day. 1/6 of American youth say they're constantly on TikTok. That's a loaded gun, Congressman.
For its part, TikTok is pushing back. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, its CEO argued that a sale won't solve the government's national security concerns and that the company already has a plan in place to safeguard American user data. All of the tensions, though, between the United States and TikTok are likely going to come to a head next week when the CEO of the popular app testifies before Congress. The U.S. has already taken steps towards partially banning the app, prohibiting its use on government devices, but there remain questions of what a nationwide ban would actually look like, what impact it might have, whether a ban would even be legal. After courts shut down the White House's efforts to ban the app under the Trump administration. And of course, there's a question of political consequences. A new Quinnipiac poll shows half of Americans would support a ban on foreign technology like TikTok. But when you break down the question by age, a ban becomes far more unpopular the younger you are, because younger and more Democratic-leaning voters like TikTok, which means a key question facing this White House is what level of political backlash are they prepared to face over this decision ahead of the president's expected run for re-election. I'm joined now by Forbes tech reporter Emily Baker White, one of the reporters surveilled by TikTok, and NBC News youth and internet culture reporter Callan Rosenblatt. Emily, let me start with you on this breaking news earlier today about the Department of Justice. TikTok, ByteDance in some ways already admitted to doing this. So what does this investigation, what should we expect this investigation to lead?
Well, we don't know, and it depends what they find. So what we know is that the Department of Justice sent a subpoena to ByteDance about information that the company might have that has to do with their surveillance of journalists. And we know that the FBI has been conducting interviews as well. What we know about the surveillance is that they were trying to catch people inside the company who were talking to me, who were leaking. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty classic function inside a lot of companies. A lot of companies try to catch people who leak. But in their attempts to do that, they monitored my location, and my location data was pulled by a team that sits partially in China. And so my US citizen user data was accessed by a team in China, which is something that the TikTok and ByteDance have been desperately trying to tell the US government would not happen, and that sort of any access to US user data from China or other places outside the country are strictly controlled and only ever used for legitimate business purposes. And in this case, that access control system kind of broke down a little bit.
Emily, we've talked about, I know you've talked about this before, but did you know you were being surveilled, or did the government tell you this happened?
No, I found out that I was being surveilled last October. I have the TikTok app off my phone, so if they were trying to pull my location data from the TikTok app, they lost that ability a long time ago. And my understanding is that the federal government opened an investigation after ByteDance and TikTok admitted, after conducting their own internal investigations, that this had happened.
Again, I go back to, they're opening an investigation, so then what? Again, I go back to ByteDance admitted to this because they're trying, and I think that TikTok was trying to use this as a way of saying a show of goodwill. Hey, see, we know we messed up, and the fact that we're coming forward, see, you can trust us.
Yeah, I think that's right so far. And if the Department of Justice finds some other use of that data, I'm very curious to hear about it, but I don't know about it.
Callan, let me move over to you because we were having this debate this morning among TikTok users and non-TikTok users. And the question is, would a ban on TikTok be an annoyance, or would it have serious repercussions politically and maybe culturally with young people in America?
Yeah, Chuck, I think that if TikTok goes away, you're going to see a huge hole in the social media diet and sort of the connection of young people. Now, I do want to hedge my bets a little on if this will have a huge political ramification. But I did some of the reporting in 2020 when Trump suggested this ban. And I know that a lot of young people told me this was sort of their political awakening. This was the first time they felt politics affected them in their day-to-day life. And I know a lot of young people are really frustrated. They're asking, why are you hammering down on TikTok when a lot of domestic apps also sort of track our data or have all of our data? They're a little frustrated in that. And also they say to me, why is our government focusing on this when there's climate change, there's, gun control?
Right.
Obviously, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but, that's their concern. And so I think this will motivate some young people to get politically engaged. But to what degree, I really want to hesitate to say, how much. Yeah. But yes, this will have an absolute cultural impact as well.
Yeah, I mean, my informal survey of a couple of teenagers was simply, well, I guess, if the stuff I like moves over to YouTube Shorts or moves over to Instagram Reels, I guess I'll go look at it. But they did say my kids said the reason they don't really follow it is because it's only stuff that's reposted from TikTok already.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The thing I hear all the time is if you see something on Instagram or on YouTube, you're late. You've already missed the window of it being popular.
Right.
So, these apps will, of course, fill the void. They will, take up that space. We saw the same thing happen when Vine died, when Twitter bought Vine, and then that was shuttered. We then saw, something like TikTok move in. And whether it's one of these existing companies or a new company, something will move in to take in that space. However, people are already frustrated. They say, we love this thing. We don't want it to go away. Yeah. Some people say it's fine if it, is acquired by a U.S. company, but that remains to be seen.
And the creator economy, are they already hedging their bets? Are you already seeing evidence of them preparing to move to a new platform?
Well, Chuck, people started preparing back in 2020 when Trump first announced this ban. They started saying you need to diversify. You need to be on YouTube. You need to be on Instagram. Maybe start a music career. Maybe start acting or modeling. Because when you are on a social media app, you're renting space. You never own it. It could go away at any time. Right. And so, yes, social media experts, people in the creator economy are saying, make sure that you diversify, but they're not quite ready to be panicked just yet. It didn't pan out last time. They're not sure if it'll pan out this time. And they also, they've been investing in these other platforms as well. So they feel pretty prepared, and they also don't think this is going to go away overnight. So they're not too freaked out just yet, but they are kind of sort of hedging their bets.
Emily, what would it take for you to put TikTok back on your phone?
I have a confession, which is that I hate autoplay videos. I hate them on YouTube. I hate them on Instagram. They make noise at me, like without my express consent. And so that's really why TikTok's not going back on my phone.
Fair enough.
It's not my medium.
Well, I would say this. Look, you have firsthand experience with the potential of what ByteDance could do here. Has that given you extra pause? And what would you advise? What would you advise somebody who had TikTok on their phone?
I don't think that there was an obvious reason that ByteDance and TikTok wanted to know where I was. I think there is not an obvious reason for ByteDance or TikTok to want to know where, my friends are necessarily. Right. And so I don't think, because I was surveilled, obviously random Americans will be surveilled. If, I think this was a really bad move by the company, and they would tell you this. I hesitate to say it necessarily means this is happening elsewhere across the company. I think the fear is less that they know which cafes and restaurants I like to go to, and more that if user data is not tightly enough controlled, people who, Chinese dissidents living in the United States or military operatives, or et cetera, if their data could be accessed the same way mine was, that's like much scarier. But I also don't think the fact that this happened once with my data is an indication that it's sort of part of some massive scheme of mass data collection. But maybe that's happening, but we don't have to suggest it.
Right. Emily Baker-White of Forbes, Callan Rosenblatt, my colleague here at NBC News on the Internet and Cultural Beat. Thank you both for getting us started. I want to dig more into this. Joining me now is Brendan Carr, FCC Commissioner, who's called on the government to ban TikTok. So, Brendan, let me start with why you believe the government should ban TikTok. Is it due to the data issue or due to the influence issue? Because I think these are two separate cases, but I'm curious where you see it.
Well, thanks so much. I think it is two main issues. One is national security, and the second actually has to do with mental health, some unique things that we're seeing with TikTok. But on national security, you're right. It's data and it's surveillance. We now have admissions by TikTok, as we just talked about surveilling the specific locations of Americans as journalists, as well as journalists abroad. We also have evidence now ahead of our most recent midterm election that CCP's propaganda outlets stood up TikTok accounts without disclosing the relationship to the Chinese government and targeted specific U.S. politicians for criticism ahead of the election. We obviously have this investigation ongoing right now. So I do think there's something unique about the amount of data it's collecting and the fact that, according to reporting, it's all being seen inside China, which reveals TikTok's representations to be nothing else than gaslighting.
The algorithm itself, we seem to still not be able to understand or explain the algorithm. This is their special sauce. Nobody's been able to, trust me. You think Zuckerberg wants to have it for Instagram Reels? You think that Google wants to have it for YouTube's Shorts? They don't have it. How important is it for the U.S. government to understand how this algorithm works?
Well, I think you step back from TikTok itself. The CCP have set out the goal of dominating artificial intelligence by 2030. And at the end of the day, this algorithm is part of that. And so another feature of this issue is every time we swipe on a video, every time we comment, every time we hover over something, we are sending data back to Beijing that is feeding, training, improving their AI that could be used down the road for malign purposes. I also think that TikTok is sort of uniquely replaceable when you look at a ban or a potential divestiture, because unlike Instagram or Facebook, you're not building a network of your friends or your colleagues. These are videos, to your point, from an algorithm being fed to you. So I do think that we could replace this once we act based on national security.
The courts are going to, I think, have a hard... It doesn't feel like the U.S. government has enough evidence to make this case. A lot of it's circumstantial, and a lot of it is, sort of, well, they're a bad actor, and we can't trust a bad actor. What evidence do you think the government needs to make sure this makes it through the courts, or do they need to word this more carefully?
I think we're in a really good position right now to uphold a ban or a divestiture. There's a process in place. Obviously, the Treasury Department, CFIUS, has been building a case on TikTok for over 2 years now. And there's precedent for this. They looked at Grindr recently, an application that had some Beijing-based investment. They said we have national security concerns, and there was the forced sale divestiture of that Beijing-based ownership for Grindr. We can do that here. We also have a broader process in place right now. The Biden administration, through an executive order, stood up a process at the Commerce Department that's looking at all applications. So while TikTok, I think, is the lowest of the low-hanging fruit, given the record we have, that's sort of the first one that's working its way through this broader review.
So what would that mean for Telegram, which has Russian government sovereign fund investments, or Twitter, which has the Saudi sovereign fund as an investment?
Yeah, I think all these applications should be run through that process. And I think the way that you're going to get at the next problematic application is we have to show the fortitude to move forward with TikTok, given the record that we have. Again, admitted location spying. We have issues with their testimony here in the U.S. They've said, for instance, that they involve with something called heating, which is artificially boosting certain types of content. And they were asked point blank, has there been heating that's taken place from inside China? They refused to answer. They testified here a couple weeks ago, and they were asked, do you share this U.S. user data with personnel in Beijing that are themselves members of the CCP, and they said they didn't want to get into the political affiliations of people. So I do think we've seen the smoking gun with TikTok. At the FCC, we've done similar things. For instance, we denied China Mobile the right to connect to our networks based on national security concerns. And once we did that, that then allowed us to go after China Telecom, China Unicom. So I think that's the right approach, which we have a process. TikTok's gone through it. Let's move on it, and then let's pick up these other apps.
So this really is a ban on Chinese technology essentially being able to be integrated in U.S. infrastructure. Is that the way to look at this ban?
No, what we've done both at the FCC and in these other contexts is you always look for what I call a plus factor, which is, as of right now, having ties back into China itself is not enough for a ban or some sort of concerted action. You look for additional evidence. We had that with Huawei, we had that with China Mobile, and again, with TikTok, I think we're seeing on a bipartisan basis the evidence is present. FBI Director Chris Wray obviously has spoken out. Democrat Chair of Senate Intel Mark Warner has been a strong leader. He has said that TikTok scares the dickens out of him. And so I think we have the evidence that goes beyond simply it's an app with ties back to China that justifies action here.
Their resistance to divesting, the resistance itself, evidence.
When we went through this a couple years ago, they said that they would refuse to do a divestiture. I do think it's interesting and perhaps telling that Beijing before has attempted to stop that type of conduct. I think it goes to the ties ultimately from CCP to ByteDance back to TikTok. In fact, there was a new research report just out this week from the Australian Parliament, 113-page document that walked through the very close ties between the CCP and ByteDance and the leverage they have, not just for data and surveillance, but also for foreign influence campaigns.
And more importantly, American companies have to abide by CCP protocols to do business in China, correct?
Well, it's interesting. Talk about reciprocity. Right now, Facebook, Google services, Instagram, they're barred already from doing business in China. So I think on reciprocity...
those that do end up having to set up subsidiaries, things like this, aren't they?
So I think we justified to ban it on reciprocity grounds alone, but that's not what we're doing. Again, we've looked at this record of very concerning data flows, and that's what the basis of this action is for. And I've been very pleased to see the Biden administration, again, reported just this week, say ban or divestiture. Obviously, devil's in the details, we'll see, but I think that's the right direction.
All right, but what about one more concern, which is we're worried about the Chinese having all of our data. Why aren't we equally concerned about Mark Zuckerberg having it all?
We should. I think there's a baseline level of concern that I have in this country with all applications, the amount of data that they have. There's work going on in Congress right now to put some better baseline privacy protections in place. We should do that. I just think there's something very unique about TikTok, in part because we can compare it to the sister app that works in China called Douyin. And as you know, if you look at the content that's shown to kids in China and Douyin, it's very different. It's science exhibits, museum experiments, educational materials. Here we get things like the Blackout Challenge. We get content fed to young girls that have eating disorder, self-harm content.
That stuff's not allowed there.
Right.
Yeah. It is interesting. I had a friend of mine who was a bit skeptical of all this. Oh, I don't think TikTok's doing what you think it's doing. And then on the Lunar New Year, this person picked up his phone and saw Xi wishing him a Happy New Year on TikTok.
Right.
Suddenly he started to think differently. Brendan Carr, thanks for coming in.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
Welcome back. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, issued an arrest warrant today for Russian President Vladimir Putin. It accuses him of war crimes and for overseeing the forced deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. A Kremlin spokesperson called the warrant outrageous, but also null and void, since Russia withdrew from the ICC in 2016. Now, the arrest warrant comes just days before Chinese President Xi is expected to meet with Putin as the two leaders look to build upon what they have called a no-limits partnership. This will be Xi's first visit to Russia since Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine. Of course, basically the last time Putin left Russia was to visit with Xi just before he launched his invasion into Ukraine. Joining me now is Mike McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia and, of course, an NBC News national security and international affairs analyst. All right, Mike. Russia declares the ICC indictment null and void. The United States isn't exactly a friendly to the ICC either. So what does this mean and what doesn't it mean?
Well, it's a symbolic move first and foremost, right? Putin's not going to get arrested anytime soon. I think it's the right move, by the way. Everybody's talking about it. We want to talk about it. We want to talk about those crimes that he committed. We want to document them. And we want to deter others from possibly participating in the future. I think that's the most important thing. People might think twice. Russians might think twice about committing similar crimes in Ukraine, knowing that they're going to go. They went after Putin. They can go after you too, Mr. Soldier. So I think that's a good thing. Second, they're not a member. We're not a member. I think we should be a member personally. I think that would strengthen the ICC. But set that aside, this is going to haunt him for the rest of his life. He is going to be indicted by them for the rest of his life. He's going to have to think about where he travels for the rest of his life. And in other cases, I'm thinking of Milosevic. When he was initially indicted for crimes against humanity, he laughed it off. He was president. Ha, 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 no big deal. It became a big deal after he was overthrown and then eventually arrested.
And that's when, you know, look, you're not going to see this happen while he's in power. It's if he's not in power and alive, then maybe we will see him not on Elba, but in The Hague. Let me move to the more concerning development over the last few days, and that is Xi going to Moscow. And it certainly looks like this is simply, it looks like he's going to agree to arm him. Any reason to believe he's not?
Well, I'm not sure he's going to do that. I'm not sure yet. I think we should wait. I think the strategy of exposing intelligence that the United States uncovered about possible military assistance has created doubt about that. So let's wait and see. I do think this, however, undermines Xi Jinping's strategy of trying to have his cake and eat it too, right? Remember, he didn't vote with Putin on the various United Nations General Assembly resolutions condemning the war, right? Only 5 or 6 countries did that, the rogue states. He didn't do that. He then put out his peace plan, which, by the way, President Zelensky did not denounce as quickly as the Biden administration did. But by going to Moscow and not going to Kiev, I think he's sending a pretty strong signal about what side of this war he's on. And I think that's a mistake on his part. I think if you're going to go to Moscow, keep flying to Kiev. If you're going to pretend to be a peacemaker and put out a peace plan and be neutral mediator, you got to engage both sides.
I was just going to say, if he shows up in Kiev next week, I think it puts us in a more complicated spot as observers or as partners with Ukraine. That's for sure. Mike, before I let you go, John Bolton was here yesterday and said he thought the drone incident deserved some retaliation, something, and he would have recommended kicking 30 or 40 Russian diplomats out of the country. He wasn't saying kinetic response, but something. What say you?
Yeah, I think there should be some response, and maybe there still will be, by the way. There should not be a kinetic response. We should not stumble into a war with Russia over this incident, and I applaud the Biden administration for responding but not overreacting. But now where they should react, in my view, is give more weapons to Ukraine. We want this war to end. We don't want to have these kind of conflicts that could pull us into a conflict with them. And in my view, the faster we give more weapons and better weapons to Ukraine, the faster this war ends. So the response should be armed reapers to Ukraine instead of something in response to this unarmed reaper in international waters.
Right. Don't let this incident let us slow roll, which is in some ways what Russia has kind of successfully gotten us to do for about a year now. Mike McFaul, former ambassador to Russia, thanks for coming on, sharing your expertise. Up next, new questions of confidence in the banking system as President Biden calls on Congress to make it easier to punish in a criminal way bank executives whose actions lead to the kind of failures we've been watching this past week. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. President Biden is now calling on Congress to give regulators more authority to hold failed banks accountable, saying that banks and their executives should face stricter penalties for mismanagement or excessive risk taking. Move comes exactly 1 week after the stunning collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, and it caps off a wild and volatile week for banks and Wall Street, despite yesterday's news that a group of 11 major banks had agreed to essentially rescue the ailing First Republic Bank, by depositing $30 billion into its accounts. Yesterday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen assured Congress that the U.S. banking system was sound. I'm joined now by Thomas Honig. He's the former president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, former vice chair of the FDIC, and now a distinguished fellow with the Mercatus Center. Mr. Honig, let me start with the basic question here. Failure of the bank executives, failure of the regulators, both, and who's more at fault?
Well, certainly failure of the banker. It's their responsibility to run a bank, even when there is a lot of turmoil in the market, which there has been. So that's the first point of responsibility. Yes, failure, I think, at least it appears to be, on the supervisor. And I think it has more to do with the fact that this bank grew so rapidly, 6% a year for 3 years. That's a red flag. I think they'll have to look to see if the examiners and the Federal Reserve looked into that carefully. And then when you do that, you would see the concentration in the sources of funds, and you would then examine carefully their risk and liability asset management procedures. So they're on both parts, and it has to be looked at and corrected, I hope, going forward.
You know, it's interesting to me, all these bank failures that we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks, they did have one thing in common, not just medium-sized banks, but they all basically had sort of a single sector clientele, if you will, right? Or a single industry and all this stuff. Can you create a regulation to avoid that, or are you better off basically just raising capital requirements for banks like Silicon Valley Bank or the bank in New York? I think it was Signature. Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the principles violated there was you're supposed to diversify your loan portfolio just like you do, like you and I would be expected to do. So I think there is that, and the examiners should be taking a look at that. But I also think one of the issues that we have in our banking system is it is a highly leveraged system.
Yep.
And I have said for some time that the capital, having the investors put more capital, more of their money at risk in the activities would, I think, bring a better degree of discipline to the management's action, since the people are right there, and their directors would be some of those who follow that bank management and say, hey, I got my money in this. Yeah. Let's take a little closer look at all this.
You know, it's funny you bring up something that is very popular with hedge funds, which is they'll have the capital, they'll use their capital to borrow money, use the borrowed money to do the investment, and keep their capital.
Right.
I mean, is that something that we should be preventing, banks shouldn't allow? What would you like to see change there?
That's the business of banking. However, I would say this. If you have capital, you might borrow money, but you're putting your capital to work just as much as you are the money, because if you don't put it to work, it doesn't earn anything for you, and you're not going to do very well. So their money is there working. It's just a matter of how much money you can borrow against that capital that will define how much risk you're taking on. Because the reason you do that, you leverage your bank, you borrow this money, is you get a higher return on your capital.
Right.
So you're going to take risk. And if you take too much, you're going to get in trouble. And that's what happens. So you have to have more of your own money at risk.
Right.
Yes.
The housing crisis, there were too many loans where people only had to put down a couple of percentage points down, right? Not enough on that, and that same thing. Let me talk about, you know, one of the phrases I remember during the financial crisis in 08-09 is, I know people want some Old Testament justice, but we just don't know where to do it. Meaning hold some folks criminally account. Does somebody need to go to jail here? What would a law like that look like? And should bankers face jail time if they mismanage a bank?
That would be a pretty severe punishment, because people mismanage things and they get into trouble. I think there are criminal laws. If they embezzle, if they commit fraud, if they misreport their financial statements deliberately, they can be indicted. But failure, that's part of the capitalistic system. So you make mistakes, you fail, that's the correction. One of the things about banking that makes that so hard is that when the bank fails, it has these broader implications, like you saw last week with runs on bank. But that's not a criminal offense. And I'd hate to make failure a criminal violation in any situation. That's just, I think, going to lead to really bad outcomes in terms of who you can get into banking, who's willing to take on that kind of risk.
Right.
Now, there should be clawback provisions. If they got bonuses, bring those back and didn't hurt them. So those sorts of things are good, but you don't want to criminalize banking failure because unless there's fraud or misbehavior.
Right. What's the lesson you take away from the fact that the big banks, we kept those tighter regulations on them, had them have to have meet certain capital requirements, and they were there to help be their own backstop here with these mid-sized banks. Should the mid-sized banks have the same? Should we now look back and say, no, they need to have the same rigorous capital requirements that the big banks do?
Well, actually, the regional banks actually hold more capital per dollar of asset than the biggest banks. When you compare it in terms of equity capital to assets, which is the measure, they're actually more heavily capitalized. They're just they're not as large. The big banks, the advantage the big banks have, let's just face it, they're too big to fail. Right. So they have that's a huge advantage in the business. Right,
but didn't we just learn that Silicon Valley Bank was too medium to fail? I mean, that's
well, we did.
Yeah. I mean,
there's going to be a lot of debates about that because think about it for a moment. You have a $20 trillion industry, and you have a $300 billion bank fail, and suddenly that's systemic. No one thought that was the case.
Right.
However, remember this too. This bank, look, we're going through a shock. We've increased interest rates in this country by a factor of 20 in less than a year.
Right.
That is shocking the banking industry. This bank is not the only bank with billions of dollars of unrealized losses in their balance sheet. So we want to get through this, keep things calm, but I think that the rigor is there regardless, but you are going to have failures when you shock an economy, and that's what we're solving.
Well, don't forget, we've been living through a shocked economy since the start of the pandemic, which we just marked the 3rd anniversary of essentially the global shutdown. Never easy to reboot an economy after you did what we did. Anyway.
And we went to zero.
Exactly.
You do all that, you get a system around it, and then you shock them up. So, it's a tough time.
It is. Thomas Honig, really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience and expertise with us. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me.
Before we go to break, March 17th. This is as green as I got here. Today is St. Paddy's Day, and President Biden spent time today celebrating his Irish roots. This is probably his favorite holiday, folks. And he included a meeting, of course, with Ireland's head of government, and he honored the special relationship between the U.S. and Ireland. And the White House continued the tradition of dyeing the fountain on the White House lawn green for the holiday. That's some things are kind of nice to see. Up next, speaking of places to go green for St. Paddy's Day, we're going to dive into the Chicago mayoral runoff. We know that the river might be green today, and what it means for the Democratic Party, though, coming up. Welcome back. We're following some breaking news late this afternoon in the investigation into Donald Trump's handling of classified documents. According to the New York Times, which cited 2 people familiar with the matter, a federal judge has ruled that the former president's lawyer must testify before the special counsel's grand jury. This is on the classified document investigation, not Georgia, not Manhattan. The Times is reporting that the judge ruled that the government had met the threshold for what's known as a crime fraud exception to the idea of attorney-client privilege, which of course is what Trump was arguing about. The exception applies when there's a reason to believe that a lawyer's legal advice or services has been used to further a crime. And so essentially, this judge is saying the government was able to meet that threshold. We have not yet been able to confirm this reporting here at NBC, but we do know that 2 major news organizations, The Times and The Post, have. We'll bring you any new details as soon as we get them here. But before we turn our full attention to the 2024 campaign trail, there are developments in one of the more interesting races of 2023. It's the mayoral runoff in Chicago. After Democrat Lori Lightfoot became the city's first mayor in 40 years to lose re-election. As we mentioned before, this race has become something of a proxy battle between rival factions inside the Democratic Party as progressives and centrists debate how the party should address the issue of rising crime. The candidates who advanced to the runoff, Brandon Johnson and Paul Vallis, shared the debate stage last night ahead of the April 4th election. And as you might expect, the issue of crime was front and center. Take a listen to one of their exchanges.
The bottom line is my opponent wants to defund the police. He doesn't want to fill the 1,100 vacancies. He does not want to bring back retired officers or invite other officers who have left to return without any loss of seniority. So at the end of the day, what you've got to do is you've got to fill the ranks, you've got to fill those vacancies, and you've got to deploy the police into the communities.
I'm not going to defund the police, never said it, right? But what we're going to do is train and promote 200 more detectives because we're not solving crime in the city of Chicago, especially in black and brown poor communities. The best way to engender confidence with public safety, you got to catch people.
Joining me now on set, Tia Mitchell, the Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Faz Shakir, senior advisor to Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, and Stephen Hayes, the editor and CEO of The Dispatch, as well as an NBC News political analyst. Tia, let me start with that framing last night. It does seem, if you have to say I'm not for defunding the police, you're probably not in a good position right now.
Yeah, and it's kind of sad to see it all oversimplified. Policing is kind of complicated. Ideally, you would want a leader who can see the nuance in both. Of course, you want to fully fund a police department that does its job. It investigates crimes, it gets the bad guys, and the police themselves are working well for the community and not corrupt and all that good stuff. But you also want to address the social issues that are at the crux of the defund the police movement, but often gets lost in the conversation about diverting funds for mental health, for poverty, for jobs and resources that could possibly keep people away from a life of crime. But instead you get this binary that, of course, we're seeing play out in the mayoral election. And yes, it is going to force voters, unfortunately, to have to kind of make a choice. Which one do they prefer more? The more progressive thought about policing being more holistic, or is it a strictly law and order, get more boots on the ground and hope that crime comes down? You know,
Faz, it seemed to me that Brandon Johnson missed an opportunity to make the and argument that essentially Tia just made. And he didn't make the and argument. And it did seem like he almost accepted the premise that this is a black and white issue, not referring in that strain per se.
Well, I also think that there's substantive ideological disagreements here. And you're saying, you know, it's a faction within the Democratic Party. Obviously, Vallis has called himself a pseudo-Republican, or even mentioned he's a Republican, so I would argue that maybe it's not. He is a registered
Democrat.
Yes, he says that.
I mean,
he says that, but he's called himself a Republican, agrees with Republican ideas on a lot of things, obviously.
Does that mean he shouldn't be a Democrat?
Well, I would argue that sometimes he's not, and that's where I think that we're going to have a debate about it, because in some sense, you know, my full disclosure, my boss, Bernie Sanders, has endorsed Brandon Johnson. We believe that you got a working class fight here. Do you know who Brandon Johnson is? He's from the Chicago Teachers Union. You know, and you got a guy who's privatized their pensions, moved them into the private market, lost a lot of money in the Chicago teachers world. That's one of the reasons that there's a big fight going on there. It's a working class fight. One of the reasons why I'm excited about it. Public housing is a big issue in Chicago. Healthcare is a big issue in Chicago. Those are the issues on which Brandon Johnson is going to be balanced, I think. But you got to elevate them over this public safety.
But this is a fight within the Democratic Party. I mean, there is this more moderate sector of the Democratic Party that spoke out vociferously against the defund the police movement. I think they had public support when they did so. And Brandon Johnson, unfortunately for him, he did embrace defund the police. I mean, this isn't as gray as he's trying to make it sound. And now he's being called on it. He's got to defend it. He's backing away from it. He's not sort of reiterating that support. I think the other thing that's difficult for him beyond just the crime issue, the defund the police issue, is what he wants to do with the rest of the money. I think you can make a good case, as Faz did, that progressives in the city would like that money, would like it to be spent. There's a thriving business community in Chicago, or if you talk to some of them, they would say there was a thriving business community in Chicago. You've had people fleeing the city because of spending, because of the way that Chicago has run its business, the way the state of Illinois has run its business. And he's talking about raising taxes by nearly $1 billion. That's a hard sell. I mean, I think this is a clear ideological difference.
You know, what's interesting, Tia, here, though, is leading progressives have gotten involved. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. Joe Biden is staying quiet. J.B. Pritzker is not getting involved. Some of the...
Jim Clyburn is getting involved.
On the other side, right?
No, supporting
he's supporting Brandon Johnson. But that was a
there.
mild surprise on that one because he's been so he's been angry over the defund the police.
That's right.
So what do we think the White House wants to see happen here?
Well, I would say that the White House wants to stay out of it because at the end of the day, the White House wants to have a good working relationship with whoever is elected mayor.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, why take a risk? Why gamble when you don't really have to? And you can say it's a Democratic race and may the best man win, and we'll be able to work with whoever because we didn't choose sides. So I think that's kind of a smart thing to do. It's not, you know, even on the progressive side, I'm sure either one of them would love Joe Biden's endorsement, but will he really move the needle in such a local race? Probably not.
I want to talk about TikTok. Is there a potential backlash?
Are you a TikTok star? Do you
What's
have a
that?
TikTok account?
I do not. No, I do not have TikTok on this phone. I am the only one in my nuclear family that does it.
That's a shame. I've seen you dance.
I know.
You really should have one.
Is there any political backlash that the president needs to fear by pushing forward with a TikTok ban? Beth?
Political backlash, I'm not. I mean, the China politics, as we know, it's easy to beat up. Xenophobia works. Sadly, I'm someone who probably is minority with my own party on this one. I'm not into xenophobia, but I understand it works politically. So if you have China scare, China concern, oh, they're beating us at this thing or that thing, they can see your data. Obviously, you could flip this argument, and people in China can Facebook, can Google, can YouTube.
They can't.
Well,
that's actually, there is a reciprocity issue. There is no Twitter over there.
Right,
there is no Facebook over there. They won't let us in because they fear American surveillance.
Is there
China.
opportunities for American companies to get data of Chinese companies? Of course there are, yes. And so I mean, I think that there can be this concern. I don't happen to share it, but I understand the politics of it tends to work when you want to raise
Well,
concern.
the reason I'm asking is that obviously it's more popular among younger voters. Do you worry about younger voters rebelling over this?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
I would, because younger voters who are not paying attention to the day-to-day contours of American politics will suddenly be forced to, because they will say, oh, wait, I'm not able to do this. We're not able to do it in the way that I wanted to. But I do think there's a real
the government was going to ban TikTok entirely.
If that's the way
way
that this plays among that demographic, I think there is political risk there. But there's also a security issue. It's a real security issue, and I think it's not. I think you can make the security argument without playing to xenophobia. I mean, Lord knows we have politicians who would like to make the xenophobic argument, but there's a real security issue.
And that's the question. I mean, what does the Biden administration think they're going to be able to succeed at that the Trump administration failed at?
Well, I mean, when you talk about just security, because I do agree, there are security concerns. So I think the Biden administration can say, because of the security concerns, we don't want them on government property. We don't want them using government resources, government Wi-Fi, even things like that. And then you can make your own decision for the Wi-Fi at your house and for your own personal device. And I think that could be the divide. Now, if they go beyond that, you might have a little bit of concern. But on the other hand, you would hope that the owners of TikTok and the regulators could work something out so that a very popular app could move forward in the United States that is becoming the news feed for a lot of people.
The fascinating thing is they're actually spending more money to try to figure out how to keep ByteDance involved, and you're just like, why are you resisting this? There's actually a better financial case to just simply do it off, pay a dividend, and move on. The fact that they don't is oddly suspicious. Steve Hayes, I have you here. John Bolton, I don't have time to play it, but he was on here yesterday just scratching his head, didn't understand the logic of Ron DeSantis's territorial dispute, classifying Ukraine as a territorial dispute, while talking about the Chinese Communist Party, which actually, if you wanted to talk about Taiwan, is actually, by definition, an actual territorial dispute here. But he didn't understand the political logic of it. As he put it, he said, is suddenly somebody saying, I'm for Trump? Oh, now I'm for DeSantis because he has the same position on Ukraine.
No, I think, I agree. I'm puzzled to a certain extent by the political decisions here. I think what the DeSantis team would tell you is they don't want to create space with Trump. They would like to be there. For the Republican Party, who are tired of Donald Trump, tired of his antics, beyond the core, sort of, let's say, 25% of sort of Trump loyalists. It's a huge swath of the Republican Party that more or less liked what he wanted to do, like what he did as president policy-wise, but is tired of the drama, wants to move on. I think Ron DeSantis is trying to position himself to be the person who can swoop in there. We saw that happen in 2016, and it didn't work.
Hey, Faz, any anti-Ukraine funding going to grow on the left or not?
anti-Ukraine funding.
Meaning, the left has been pretty supportive of this.
Yeah. I think there's going to be some constraints that are coming at some point soon. Once the end date, just like you remember Afghanistan when we started to take a turn, when's the end point for our engagement? Yeah, I do think it's going to come.
There's always been anti-war progressives who have voted against Ukrainian funding from the beginning. You know, they're just, as a principle, have said, I oppose this. So they could increase in ranks.
All right, something we'll all watch. I got to rush out here. And in one more segment, Faz, Stephen, and Tia, thank you all. Still ahead, we got some exclusive NBC News reporting on the fentanyl crisis and why cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico has essentially dissolved. But first, one of the short documentary films that premiered at the Meet the Press Film Festival late last year is now airing this weekend on MSNBC. The Recall Reframed examines the 2018 recall of a California judge who lost his judgeship after a backlash on his decision in the sexual assault case of a Stanford swimmer named Brock Turner. This will air again on one of the NBC Universal platforms, MSNBC. It'll air at 10 p.m. We'll be right back. We are back. President Biden is facing increased pressure to tackle the flow of fentanyl into the United States, as some lawmakers call on the administration to simply designate these Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And it all comes amid new reporting that cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico on the war against fentanyl is at its lowest point in decades. And joining me now with more on his reporting is Ken Delaney, and our justice correspondent these days that focuses on these issues. So, Ken, look, there is a roadmap, a blueprint of how we fight the drug war, how we fight cartels. We did it in Colombia. It's a lot of cooperation. We've been doing it in Mexico. It calls for a lot of joint country cooperation. But it does seem as if ever since AMLO was elected president, the ability to stop these cartels has been minimized. Sounds like it's even worse.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing from my sources, Chuck. I spoke to a number of experts who study the drug war and also a former DEA official and others outside and inside the government. And they say it's really as bad as it's ever been. There is no substantive cooperation happening between U.S. law enforcement and Mexican law enforcement. And that was underscored by the fact that there was cooperation when those Americans were kidnapped, two of them killed. The Mexicans allowed the U.S. to help them, and they found them immediately. I mean, it was within a day, right? And so that underscored the fact that on these other issues, there really is nothing. And a former DEA official, Matt Donahue, told me that he said, look, we know where these traffickers are. We know where this fentanyl is being made, but we just can't get the Mexicans to do anything about it. And he said that, frankly, corruption is a big part of it.
I mean, Ken, is it the fact that AMLO, during his news conference, suddenly got a phone call and say, oh, look, we found the kidnappers? I mean, the speed was the reveal that they're intentionally not doing anything about these cartels because they have their own relationship with them.
That's right. That's certainly what these people I've been talking to are saying. They're saying, look, it's so corrupt that that Mexican law enforcement spends more time surveilling the DEA agents who are in the country to try to figure out who they're talking to than they do surveilling drug traffickers. And they say that, Mexico says they do seizures of fentanyl, but they refuse to provide the U.S. government any samples from those seizures. And it's not clear whether that stuff's being sold back into the drug market. It's really, really bad. Worse than I had thought when I started talking to these folks.
And so how much of it is financial corruption and how much of it is sort of AMLO's taste for power?
So there's a lot of financial corruption. Remember, the U.S. government arrested Mexico's defense minister, and then Bill Barr had to hand him back because Mexico was so angry. There were allegations he was essentially working for the cartels. I don't know what the U.S. government knows about AMLO, but when I talk to people who have studied him, they say that he is a populist, very parochial Mexican leader who, it's part of the politics there, too, to resist any appearance of American interference. But he's taken it to a new extreme. And then the other day he said that they don't even produce fentanyl in Mexico, which is just a blatantly false statement.
And what seems weird, AMLO looks like he forged a better relationship with Trump than Biden. Is that your sense?
Yeah, well, Biden sent a team of top officials down there last week to have some high-level talks on fentanyl, including Lisa Monaco, the Deputy Attorney General, Liz Sherwood-Randall, a top Homeland Security advisor. And on the day that these talks were going to happen, AMLO went out and gave his news conference and said, fentanyl is a U.S. problem. We don't make it here. We don't have a problem here. So he completely torpedoed those talks. They thought they would be able to announce some initiative. They came back to Washington with nothing, and it just underscored how bad things are, Chuck.
And do we not push back more publicly on the AMLO because of how much we need his help on the border security stuff?
You've got it absolutely right. When I talk to administration officials about, well, what are you doing about this? They say, well, we prefer to raise these issues in private rather than wagging our finger in public because we find that doesn't work. And the reality is Mexico has a lot of leverage because we do need them on the migrant stuff. They're our largest trading partner. They're the largest place where Americans live, the biggest tourist destination. So it's a complicated relationship. It's not only about the drug cartels, but more than 100,000 Americans are dying every year of drug overdoses. This is a different kind of drug problem than 10 years ago, Chuck.
It's the clearest example yet where it's pretty obvious to many of us that AMLO is an ally of the cartels. And it's hard to not see it any other way. Ken Delanian with some terrific reporting here. Ken, thank you.
Good to be with you, Chuck. Thanks.
And before we go, I do want to note that earlier in this hour, we rolled the wrong piece of tape. It showed former National Security Advisor John Bolton while talking about NBC's reporting on this story and Ken Delanian's reporting. Just a wrong button that was hit there. We apologize for the error. We'll be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.